What if I told you that when an Amish girl is pushed out of her community at 17, she doesn't just lose her home, she loses her language, her identity, her family, and every skill she was ever taught, all in the same afternoon? What leads here? It is almost never a single moment. A girl does not wake up on a Tuesday and find herself cast out by sundown without a long, painful accumulation of signs that everyone saw and nobody addressed. The most common reasons a 17-year-old finds herself pushed to the edges are pregnancy before marriage, a relationship with a non-Amish boy, or repeated defiance the bishop has begun to notice. Any one of these, handled quickly, might be resolved inside the community. The wrong one at the wrong moment ends with a girl standing at the end of her family's lane with nowhere to go. Not yet baptized. Here is the legal and theological reality most outsiders do not know. A 17-year-old Amish girl almost certainly has not been baptized yet. Baptism in the Amish church typically happens between the ages of 18 and 22, and it is the moment a person formally commits to the community's rules for life. Formal shunning, known as Maidang, can only be applied to someone who made that oath and then broke it. A girl who was never baptized has never broken a promise to the church, and therefore the official machinery of excommunication cannot be used against her. Researchers and Amish scholars confirm this consistently. She cannot be formally shunned. But unofficial exile, as many former Amish women have described in their own words, can be functionally identical to the formal version and in some ways harder to survive because it carries no name, no process, and no possibility of appeal. The door goes cold. Before she leaves, the community withdraws. This is the part that takes longest and hurts deepest, the slow cooling of every relationship she has ever had, happening gradually and without announcement until one day the warmth is simply gone. Neighbors who once greeted her stop making eye contact. Girls she grew up beside stop including her in conversations after church. Her own mother begins answering her questions in shorter sentences. Her father stops asking how she is. Nobody declares anything. Nobody holds a meeting or issues a verdict. The community simply turns its attention away from her 1 degree at a time until she is standing in the middle of every room she has ever known and feeling entirely alone inside all of them. For a girl raised in a community where being known and seen by everyone around her was as natural as breathing, this withdrawal is not just social, it is physical. It changes the air in the house. She feels it before she can name it, and she names it long before anyone around her admits it is happening. The afternoon she leaves. When it finally happens, it is usually quieter than anyone imagines. There is rarely a dramatic confrontation, a door slammed, a speech given. More often, there is a conversation, brief and devastating, in which a parent or an elder makes clear, without quite saying it directly, that the situation as it stands cannot continue. She understands what is being said. She has understood it for weeks, maybe longer. She packs what she can carry. For most Amish girls, this means plain clothing that will mark her immediately as Amish in the outside world, a small amount of money if her family gives her any, and whatever personal items she can fit into a single bag. She has no phone. She has likely never used one. She has no car and no license. The first transportation available to her is whatever she can arrange on foot, or a ride from whoever outside the community she has been quietly building a connection with in the weeks before this moment, because girls who end up here almost always knew it was coming and made at least one small plan. The first night outside the community is described by nearly every former Amish woman who has written or spoken about it the same way. Overwhelming, disorienting, and nothing like what they expected, even when they had tried to prepare. The silence is wrong. Not the good silence of a farm at night, but the unfamiliar silence of a place that holds no one she knows. If she is with a friend from outside the community, she is dependent on that person for everything, a dependency that is both a relief and its own kind of vulnerability. If she is alone, she is managing basic logistics, finding somewhere to sleep, finding something to eat, in a world whose systems she has never been taught to navigate. Former Amish women consistently describe this period as one of the loneliest of their lives. not because there are no people around them, but because none of the people around them know who she is. For 17 years, her identity was held by her community. Every person in her district knew her name, her family, her history. Now she is in a place where she is entirely unknown, and the absence of being known feels, in those first hours, less like freedom and more like disappearing. No paper, no past. Within the first few days, the practical obstacles arrive alongside the emotional ones, and they are considerable. A 17-year-old Amish girl leaving her community may have a birth certificate filed at the county level, but she has likely never held it, never needed it, and does not know how to request it. She has no social security card she has ever used, no government-issued ID, no bank account, no credit history, no verifiable address, and no employment record that the outside world recognizes. She has an 8th grade education from a one-room Amish schoolhouse that the outside world does not accept as a high school diploma or GED equivalent. Getting a birth certificate requires navigating a county record system she was never taught existed. Getting an ID requires the birth certificate. Opening a bank account requires the ID. Finding housing requires a bank account, references, and an income that does not yet exist. Every step requires the previous step to have been completed first, and every step requires knowledge that her community specifically never provided. Some girls spend months trapped in this loop before finding the right organization or individual who knows how to walk them through it. Others figure it out alone, one bureaucratic obstacle at a time, through trial and error in a system that was never designed with them in mind. Skills nobody asked for. What she does have, and what often surprises the people around her once she starts working, is a set of practical competencies that most 17-year-olds anywhere else in America simply do not possess. She can cook from scratch for a large family without a recipe. She can manage a garden large enough to feed people through winter. She can sew clothing by hand, repair things that break, care for children from infancy, manage animals, work a full day of physical labor before most people have finished their morning coffee, and do all of it without needing to be told twice or supervised. These skills do not show up on a resume. They do not translate into credentials that employers can quickly evaluate, but they translate into performance, and employers who give her a chance consistently report the same thing. She works harder than almost anyone they have hired, and she does not complain about it. The problem is finding employers willing to take a chance on someone with no work history, no references, and an educational record that stops at 8th grade. The skills are real. Getting anyone to see them before she proves them is the obstacle. The work ethic is not a survival strategy. It is simply the only mode she has ever known. The ones who help. There are organizations specifically built for this situation, and most of the girls who eventually find their footing in the outside world find it through one of them. Amish Anabaptist organizations like Amish Heritage Foundation and various faith-based transition programs in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana offer practical assistance to young people leaving Amish communities, including help navigating the documentation process, connecting with housing, and finding employment. Some former Amish women who successfully built lives outside the community now run or volunteer with these organizations specifically because they remember what it felt like to arrive in the outside world with nothing and no map. These organizations understand details that general social services do not. They know which counties have simplified the birth certificate request process for Amish-raised individuals. They know which employers in the area have successfully hired former Amish workers before. They know how to explain the educational gap on a job application in a way that gives the girl a fair chance rather than an automatic rejection. They also know, from long experience, that the emotional need is just as urgent as the practical one, and that a 17-year-old who has just lost her entire community in a single week needs someone who understands what was actually lost, not just what paperwork still needs to be filed. For the girls who find these organizations early, the difference in outcomes is significant. For those who don't, the first months are considerably harder and lonelier than they needed to be. Those who go back, A significant number of girls who leave under these circumstances eventually return, and the reasons they return are more complicated than outsiders typically assume. Some return because the situation that caused the rupture has resolved itself, and the community is willing to accept a confession and restore the relationship. Some return because the outside world proved harder than they had the resources to navigate at 17 with no support system and no preparation. Some return because the grief of losing their family, their language, and their entire social world became more painful than whatever they were trying to escape. The return is not always clean or simple. A girl who comes back to the community after several months outside carries an experience that nobody around her will fully acknowledge. She is expected to confess, recommit, and resume her place as though the gap in the middle did not happen. The community's forgiveness, when it comes, is genuine within its own framework, but it does not come with permission to talk freely about what she saw and did while she was gone. She steps back into the rhythm of the household, and the expectation, unspoken and absolute, is that the door she just walked back through is the one that stays closed from now on. Whether that door actually stays closed depends entirely on the girl and on what the outside world showed her before she came back to stand in front of it again. Those who stay gone. The ones who stay gone build their lives in the outside world piece by piece, and the building is slow. The first year is almost universally described as the hardest, a combination of practical obstacles and a grief that has no socially acceptable name in the world they have entered. Modern culture does not have a well-developed vocabulary for mourning an entire community, a language, a daily rhythm, and every relationship you have ever had, all at once. Therapists who have not worked specifically with former Amish often underestimate the scope of what was lost, treating it as a difficult family separation rather than the total cultural displacement it actually is. By the second and third year, most of those who stay gone have found work, found housing, and begun the slow process of building a social world to replace the one they lost. Many describe forming close friendships with other former Amish, people who understand without explanation why certain sounds or smells or seasonal rhythms produce a grief that seems disproportionate to anyone who did not grow up inside the same world. Some pursue a GED and then further education. Some find trades that align with the practical skills they already have. Some build careers in healthcare, social work, or community organizations, drawn to work that involves showing up for people in crisis, because that is, at its foundation, what they were raised to do. What almost none of them lose entirely is the pull of what they left. Former Amish women who have built full, successful lives outside the community still describe driving past a farm in late October and feeling something they cannot quite name move through them. Not regret exactly, not longing for a life they want to return to, something more like the memory of belonging, which is its own particular kind of ache, and which does not diminish cleanly with time. What happens when an Amish girl is pushed out of her community at 17 is not a story with a clean beginning or a clean ending. It begins long before the afternoon she leaves, in the slow withdrawal of warmth that precedes the final conversation, and it does not end on the day she finds housing, or the day she gets her first paycheck, or even the day she stops crying every morning before she gets out of bed. It is a long, unglamorous, largely invisible process of rebuilding a self that the community had been building for her, and it happens mostly without an audience and without acknowledgement from the world she came from. The girls who survive it best are not the ones with the most resources or the most education. They are the ones who find early at least one person who understands what was actually lost. Not a home, not a set of rules, an entire world, held together by people who knew their name from birth and would have shown up without being asked for every hard thing that ever happened to them. Losing that at 17, regardless of the reason, is a loss that most of the modern world is not equipped to fully understand, because most of the modern world has never had it to lose in the first place. What she carries with her into whatever life she builds is not just trauma and not just grief. She carries the work ethic, the competence, the deep knowledge of how to be present for someone in a hard moment, the capacity for silence, and the understanding, earned at enormous cost, that belonging is not something you find, It is something you build, slowly, with people who choose to keep showing up. She already knows how to do that. She learned it in the same place she lost everything else.